Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I rank the worst card designs of 1992. For 1992, this was a year where they took the great designs and the very much not great designs of 1991. They had to figure out where they were going to go with it. Unfortunately, for the really great designs, all of those suffered through the process. And for the really terrible designs, fortunately, they had a tendency to get better. So we saw an evolution where card designs were all evolving. Nobody stayed at the exact same level. And so while we lost a couple of the really great designs of 1991, we picked them up in other places in 1992. So that gave us a really good evolution of card designs overall, because you got to see the creativity over here, and then we got to see creativity over there. And if you missed out in one place, you got to enjoy it later on. And the really terrible card designs, it wasn't, for the most part, it wasn't that good card designs were getting terrible. It was that new ideas were not working the way that they were supposed to. Everybody was trying to grow up, and they were trying to figure out what that was. And in cases like Fleer Ultra, they very much figured it out. In cases like we're going to be seeing here, they very much did not figure it out. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at cases where either the card technology had not caught up, or the card design had not caught up with the technology, or the thought process hadn't really figured out how to design a full card, etc. That's what we're going to be looking at. And so there's really an excuse for every one of them. Not a good excuse, not an acceptable excuse, but at least an excuse. And we start off with an honorable mention that doesn't even fit into the 8 cards that I'm going to be talking about, where I'm doing an honorable mention of something I wouldn't even talk about in these videos because it's a WLAF card, a World League card. And I just don't want to bring those into the discussion of the main 4 sports. But I can't let this off the hook because the 1992 WLAF wild card number on the card back, holy crap, this is bad. I mean, there are some really terrible card numbers. Oh, you better believe I'm looking at you, 1994 Flair. But this is just unbelievable. Now, my eyes aren't what they once were. It happens to the best of us. I'm living proof of that. So it's not like I go into this going, oh man, I never would have been able to see these numbers. But at the same time, I never would have been able to see them that well. Because what they did was they had a red number, and then they put a white border around the outside, and then they had a dark background behind. And so the whole problem with it is that the number is supposed to be the red number inside, and then the white border around the outside is supposed to be an accent that doesn't enunciate the number. You're not supposed to read the white number. You're supposed to read the red number. But the two colors are so close that you can't see the difference between the red and the white, which means all the detailing which is inside is lost. So you have to look at the big fuzzy white number on the outside and figure out what they were trying to go with. I opened a box of this, and I managed with a flashlight actually to put together the set, to put it all in order. And then I got an opportunity to buy a cheap box of it later on. I was trying to get the stripe cards. And so I ripped through that, and once I was done, I didn't even try for the numbers. I separated out the single digits, and then the double digits, and then the triple digits. And then I broke down the teams, and then I took the complete set that I had, and I used that as my guide to put together the other cards, because it was just so much easier to look at the card fronts and find the order of the cards from the card fronts. That's how bad these numbers are. They are unreal. Are they the worst card number of all time? Probably, but we'll be getting back to that, sadly. So, that's my honorable mention. I've gotten that out of my hair. Now it's time to move on to the list. And we start off with 1992 Collector's Edge. Now, this is the one card that absolutely does not belong in this list, and it absolutely is unavoidable because it's actually a good card design. The problem is they didn't do a marriage of the card design with the technology. The technology, which is a vinyl or plastic card, the blacks aren't rich. The colors aren't vibrant. That's just not the way that things read on these cards. And so you have to understand that and do your design around it. Had these cards been made the same way that Pinnacle had been made, these cards would have been alongside Pinnacle. The designs would have read in a very similar way. I think they would have been really, really good, if not absolutely great cards. They're right up at that upper tier in terms of the design on the front. The back, There's some notes. I'm not going to bother to get into that, but the card front actually could have read well. Instead, because of the vinyl effect on the front of the card and the lack of richness in the final product, because of the material, it failed. You've got to do a good job of balancing the two. You learn about the technology and you make your design around that. Look at 1989 Upper Deck. That's not a great card, but it is a different type of card than any other card that had ever been made. And the design that they made was built around that. So the way the cards came out actually did a good job of balancing the two. Could have been better, but in 1989 you had an excuse for not making a great card. In 1992, you got to be on your game. And unfortunately, I don't feel that Collector's Edge did as good of a job as Upper Deck had done, and even the 89 Upper Deck set wasn't a great design, but like I said, I feel that it does a better job of marrying the technology with the design. With Collector's Edge, they didn't do it, and that's why it's really difficult to remember that these cards were supposed to be the elite cards of 1992. This was the set that was supposed to be the great elevation of cards. This was supposed to take Upper Deck and move to the next level. That's what they were trying to do. And they just didn't make the card to really work with it, which actually is kind of in the same spirit as 89 Upper Deck. But at any rate, I like the card. I wish they'd done a great job with it. They didn't do a great job with it, so they have to be called out. That's kind of the way that it works. For number 7, I'm going with Studio. And in the case of Studio, they had a really great card design in 1991, setting aside the color of the border. The only problem that they had with the 1991 design was the border. So all they needed to do in 1992 really was fix the border, and they did that. And they kept playing around with it, unfortunately. So for 91, it's just a simple portrait. Black and white portrait, that's all they needed to do. In 92, they could have just colorized the portrait and done pretty much the same thing. And it still would have been a much better card than 1991, would have been a great evolution. That's not what they did. Instead, they did colorize the portrait, but they shrank it down and put a big black and white image in the back. And where this card really suffers is the fact that that portrait on the front is dark. You can't see the player. But you can definitely see that pixelated picture in the background, to the point where the whole point of the card as a viewer is the big image in the background that's kind of blocked by something down in the corner. That's the way the cards read. To go from such a simple, straightforward, and great card in 1991 that just needed a few things to be perfected, and then go to this, it's just terrible. Now, I can't say that it is overall a terrible card. It's still actually a pretty good card, which is why it's here at 7. But that's partially because they actually did do a good job with the technology. They just forgot to turn on the lights when they photographed the players for their portraits. That's really kind of what it comes down to. But when we move on to 6, we're now stepping into the world of Topps and its difficult time with technology, which is that in 1992, for 92-93, they were jumping back into basketball. And in doing so, they decided to take not just the Stadium Club, but also Topps proper and use a true modern cardstock. And they also wanted to celebrate it by making what they called Topps Archive, which in the case of basketball was making retro cards of modern players, showing what their rookie card could have been like if they'd had rookie cards that were designed in the baseball design. Now, there are a couple of problems with this. The first one being the fact that the designs for baseball don't fit with the basketball images. I'm just going to mention that, put it out of the way, because that's not the main focus of the problem for this card. The card designs in the 80s were designed around a papery cardstock. That's where it's supposed to read. And in here we actually have a semi-gloss card that it reads in a different way, and it doesn't work with the design. Now, the designs from the 80s can work with this modern cardstock if you really take the time and put the care into getting it all to work, but they didn't do that. The printing quality is actually pretty lousy. And so that means that the card border doesn't have the strength that it should have, and the images don't read, they're bland. The whole front of this card is supposed to be a celebration, and it's just it's second rate. But it also doesn't help that on the card back, they have this futuristic card back that I don't hate. I think it's a good card back for an insert set. But what they should have done, in my opinion, was I don't think they should have used the straightforward card back for each individual year, because you need to have cohesive design across the entire set. So when you turn the cards on the back and you're putting together the set, you want the cards to all read well. That's helpful. But please do a design that looks like it's supposed to be. Do a design that looks 80s, or even they could even have used the regular 1992 Topps card back. Use that, because they used a different one for their basketball set. So they could have used the regular 92 card back for these cards for this basketball set, still had a distinct card back that would have read better with the card designs. At any rate, it's distracting when you go from card front to card back. The card front is kind of mottled and it doesn't really work. Yeah, just they needed to do a better job of really launching themselves and celebrating. And this wasn't it. And the same can be said for the 1992 Topps basketball set, Topps proper. Now, this is the first time we're stepping into a design that was used across multiple sports. And that was something that was starting to become more common. And so you actually do have to distinguish which sport, because for the 92 Topps set, football and hockey actually look pretty good. Baseball's not great. Unfortunately, in the case of baseball, you need to be able to really highlight the images, and the card doesn't do that. So that doesn't really work, but it's in basketball. This is where it really suffers, because again, the first problem is they're using the modern cardstock. So it doesn't work with the papery cardstock that the cards were designed around in the other sports. So that is the big critical failure that the card has. But on top of that, the printing quality is not very good. This is supposed to be a celebration of we're back. And this card has nothing going for it, except for a parallel that has gold foil. And oh man, we were focused on that. So much so that we never really noticed this set. The set sucks. The gold foil parallel was awesome. Now, at the end of the day, it's really boring. It's like a 65 Mustang. 65 Mustang, we know how to appreciate it. And so we appreciate it because we know we're supposed to. It's actually an ugly car at the end of the day. But if you know how to look at it, you can get excited. But this isn't even the gold foil, so I can't get excited about that. This card just is it's really disappointing. You've got to take the time to think about the card technology. And they didn't do that with either one. So the Topps proper set, I think, is more of a letdown than the archive sets. That's why I have it at 5. But I'm not done with Topps, because I've also got to talk about Bowman. Now, this is kind of weird, where if they'd done Bowman for basketball, I think it actually had the potential to work. I don't know. A big white border is really difficult with basketball cards. And that's a big part of the problem with the basketball cards that we just talked about. With Bowman, that bold white border is so powerful. And for all three sports that it was in baseball, in football, and in hockey. It didn't work really well with any of them. But I think that with hockey and with baseball, it worked well enough that I don't really need to talk about it here, because football, to me, is really, really suffering. This is the card design I always think of when I think of 1992. I don't think of 92 Ultra. I have to remember, oh yeah, that's right, they did that. I don't think of 92 Score Baseball. Oh yeah, I don't think of those. This is the one that lodges in my mind. And part of the reason was because I didn't discover it for a number of years. I never saw this card for years. I never had exposure to it. Only I very well might have. The card is so stinking boring that I don't know. I may have actually seen this many times and just never noticed it. That's really the nature of this card. Sadly, it is all designed around simplicity for an elegance, and it's simplicity for a lackluster disappearing act. It's just not a card that reads well. The only reason we care about these cards is because there aren't that many that were printed. That is the only reason. And there's nothing else that helps this card out. But there are 3 card designs that are even worse. And ironically, the next one is also worse for a similar reason, which is 1992 Score Canadian hockey. So now we're getting into talking about hockey. And in the case of this card, I would love to say this is the ultimate in bland. The card, I mean, the US version actually was successful. This card is really trying to be elegant. It's trying to be formal. It's trying almost to be a pinnacle card, almost. And they have a border around the outside that doesn't do anything. Absolutely doesn't. It's a similar color to ice, and that means that while it could have kind of a cool frosty quality, it doesn't enunciate the card. It doesn't bring out the image at the center of the card. That's the point of cards. At least with Bowman, the images read. They don't snap right off of the card in football, but at least they do read. In this case, they don't. The border around the outside kind of tones everything down, and it kind of relaxes your eyes. On top of that, they have a bunch of details inside that they don't overpower, but they do a bunch of things, but they don't do anything. That's the problem. There's no strong component that really does anything. And so it's a bunch of stuff. Well, that's what the images are too. The whole point of cards, the whole point of the front of a card is to show the picture and highlight the picture. That's all that it's supposed to do. And all that detailing is supposed to make a memorable version of that, but it's supposed to bring out the card image. That's one of the big problems with modern cards is modern cards aren't designed around images. They're designed around parallels, and the images disappear. And so it's all just the flashiness of the cards. In this case, it's the exact opposite. The card is so underwhelming that the image just disappears and you get bored. And I could go on a little bit more, but I've got to move on to number 2, which is also hockey. It's O-Pee-Chee. And all the same things apply. It's just that in this case, it does an even worse job. So here you have a thin white border around the outside, which in the right circumstances can work well. In other circumstances, it doesn't work well at all. It's tough to do with hockey because the ice in the hockey, the ice in hockey, just anything that's white on the card border, the two work together. And again, it just kind of diffuses everything. And you've got to work hard to allow that to be a framing element to make all of the image, the colors and the details in the image pop. It's tough to do that. It's always better when you've got a situation like this to use colors in the border to bring out the colors in the picture. That's the best thing to do. In this case, what they did was they tried to get the card out of the way so that the image would read, but they didn't use images that really read well and pop right off the card. And so that means you have to allow the card to do the framing, and instead it does the opposite. So that border around the outside, you become aware of it. It's a hint. You don't really see it, but it's like walking into a room and there's something that's uncomfortable about the room. You can look all over the room. You're not going to see anything because your mind is distracted by whatever that is in the background. You're not sure what it is. That's what this card does. That white border around the outside is a distraction. And then it's trying to allow the card details inside, the stripe down the side, the horizontal stripe, it's trying to allow those to actually do the border work, and those also disappear. They do the same thing that the scorecard does, except they do the bland part a lot better. So it gets down to the point where the image has to read, but everything else has you distracted to the point where the image also doesn't work. This card sucks. And yet it's number 2, which begs the question, what's number 1? Well, that's easy. That's All World. Now, All World only had 1 year. The reason they didn't have a second year wasn't how bad the card design was, it was how bad the marketing, everything was. I mean, in 1992, Pacific was still on its second year, and nobody knew about the card company. They had to wait until some random player had a sensational year, and then everybody noticed that it happened to be in this one card set for Pacific to ever get discovered. It was tough to make it work, and All World was not equipped for it, especially in their marketing. Their marketing was horrible. Not that their card designs were very good at all. Actually, that's not entirely true. The All World cards, about 70% of this card front is really, really good. They did a great job with images. They really did. And that little box down at the bottom, dude, that's what Ultra was doing. We were stunned at the Ultra boxes. Those little things, oh man, the 3D, oh, it was incredible. And here they were doing the same thing in All World, but you might not have ever noticed it. And why? Same reason you didn't notice the good images. That big, stupid flag up at the top. Now I know, there are some places in this country where you could get shot for saying big, stupid flag when referring to the US flag. But in this case, it's very appropriate, especially when they just print the flag backwards for whatever reason. It's overpowering, it's annoying, and it doesn't do anything. It completely overpowers an otherwise really good card front. Now, the thin white border around the outside, not great, not a fan, as you already know, but overall, the biggest problem this card has is that flag is so overpowering and so incongruous with anything else in the card that it totally kills the card. Even the card back actually is pretty cool. Now, all of the text and everything is really small, so it's very difficult to read, but it has a really cool quality to it, a really cool look. I think it's probably better than the Upper Deck card backs. With one note, you remember how I was talking about bad card numbers? Well, this is really good competition for wild card. This card number, it's readable with a magnifying glass. I mean, I really wonder what kind of printer they use to get that fine little detail, those numbers. Wow, they're bad numbers. But again, they're readable. If you can focus in, these numbers read so beautifully, but why did they have to make them so small? I don't know. But setting aside that, this card should be a good, if not great card. But their whole design was just to put a flag on the front, and I don't get it. It's just too much. Way too much. And there's really no way that any card for 1992 can compete with this. And Fleer has given some good sets over the years to compete with this. Well, at some point I'll have to do an all-time worst. But it's going to be a while because I got a lot of other bad cards to go through in different videos. But for 1992, this brings us to the close. So this is my list of the worst card designs for the 4 major sports in 1992. I've already talked about the total ranking for basketball and hockey. I'm going to do the best of for both baseball and football, and then I'm going to do a total of the best of. That's going to be coming up. And then I start to get into draft pick rookies and inserts, so I got a lot of fun stuff to do. But that's what I have for 1992. So if you haven't checked out my other videos, definitely do so. Do subscribe if you haven't done so. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.